So we're going to kick off with, we're going to basically do an overview of recent and pending developments, and then we're going to talk about best practice from the perspective of each of us respectively, governance, legal, actuarial and regulatory. But as is now somewhat customary, we're going to start with Gavin Quegan's really useful scene setting, which is basically about the size and the shape of the restricted scheme sector as we're now entering really year 4 of the new regime. So Gavin, over to you.
Thank you, Mike. Probably easier for me to stand up at this point. So thanks everybody for coming. There's quite a few people out there. I can recognise a lot of faces. So for the restricted schemes, I went and looked again at all of the latest reports that are on the disclosed register, and you know, it's pleasantly surprising that at the end of the day we've still got 89 restricted workplace savings schemes, 20 open to new members, 98,000 total membership, 12 billion. Going down to the bottom, we've got 110 restricted schemes in total, 14.6 billion, 166,000 investors. The more interesting stats perhaps are 23 of the workplace savings schemes have assets of greater than 100 million, and they represent 81% of the members and pensioners. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got 13 workplace savings schemes with less than 3 million in assets, and they only represent 161 members and pensioners. And the majority of those at the end of the day are probably pensioners. So you've got an average of 12 members per scheme. A lot of them, as we've talked about before, are effectively stuck in the regime because they've got pensioners and their trustee may not provide a mechanism to be able to move those pensioners anywhere other than a life company, and life companies aren't offering annuities. So those schemes continue, and the employers, all with today's date, are still supporting those schemes. In that area, we have a number of schemes where we're down to less than 6 pensioners. And when you get to that level of pensioner or membership, the actuarial assumptions and the size of the pensions that individual people have becomes an important factor, which I've had a number of discussions with trustees and with the actuaries that look after those schemes. And when it comes to funding, you can have one pensioner who has the lion's share of that liability, and if the employer's got a good support there, there's no point in it being fully funded, because if that person was the one to die, then suddenly the scheme has got an enormous surplus. And so always happy to have a discussion with people about how the funding of those very small defined benefit schemes should be dealt with FMA sort of agreeing at the end of the day that that is an appropriate course of action. During the year, it's roughly the sort of same as last year. We had 29 amendments come through that were reviewed by FMA, and subsequently we gave our certificates for registration of those deeds after execution. 3 FMA approved consents were processed in the year to June. That dealt with 1,200 members and 119 million of assets. And that was effectively moving standalone schemes into a master trust product. And I think one of them might have also been a master trust to master trust transaction. There's a few on the horizon. As of yesterday, I think I've got 4 that are coming down the pipeline at a great rate of knots to me. There's other schemes that are talking about rationalisation. So yeah, I think we're now potentially moving into a time where employers have said, superannuation, yes, we're looking at our total REM structure in some cases. We've been in the regime for 3 years, and it's time to review where we can, and especially in the defined contribution space or the hybrid scheme space where the opportunity to potentially move out the defined contribution members, and then you've just got a cohort of pensioners to look after. In terms of the second slide, the actual scheme, the market, what I've done is basically said, what did the old Superannuation Schemes Act 89 market look like? And so that effectively is all your restricted schemes. You've then got your master trust products, which the likes of New Zealand Retirement Trust, ASBs, Superannuation Master Trust, etc. The non-restricted legacy schemes, which were old retail products. And then we've got a group of retail superannuation schemes which are on market. The majority of those are primarily looking at QROPS money coming in from the UK. But in terms of a superannuation industry still, we've got 128 schemes, 25 billion. Last year we had 135 schemes, 23 billion. So we look at the membership though, and we see that there is membership decline. In terms of LITs, we've got 36 LITs now, plus the 3 corporates. What's going on in the custodial assurance exemption, which I'm sure I keep getting asked questions about. The latest that I have, as of yesterday, is that PCO have basically almost completed their drafting of a exemption notice, and the next step is we're having a quick look at it internally within FMA, and then there'll be a short consultation. It's interesting to look at what we were provided with by Workplace Savings versus where we've got to now, but I'm sure we'll get some useful input around the edges. And of course we have had one little success in terms of ticking off things off the list, and that is that all the LITs in the room have now got simplified reporting to FMA. And I really appreciate the ongoing engagement both with chairs of trustees and with LITs on all sorts of different matters that come across their desk that they need to look at.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Kevin. I'll pop up here and we'll get more preliminaries out of the way before we really get to the business end of the presentation, hearing from Helen and Bernard over there. That was great to hear from you, the custodial audits assurance exemption still being pending, Gavin. Hopefully we get to see something of an exposure draft and have a look at that and make sure it works. That's really good to hear, and it will be retroactive, I'm told, as well. Another area where good recent development, good recent engagement is the right sizing of restricted schemes compliance obligations. This FMA-initiated project whereby they're looking at the legislative and regulatory impost on restricted schemes and addressing some of those pain points. We got a really good letter in reply to our submission in May of this year from FMA, from Gavin himself, and we had a really good industry workshop in July where we gave our own feedback, and I think that both parties found that useful. Issues acknowledged as meriting work include, for DB schemes, obviously the fact that some of them are technically caught by the fund update requirement, where they have some members who have yet to reach the age and stage where their benefit is just a formula as a function of age and length of pensionable service. And there are some of whose members who have voluntary accounts or similar. Those schemes shouldn't in principle be caught by the fund update requirement. Technically they are, and that is an acknowledged work on. Annual confirmations for DB schemes as well. The legislation really doesn't respond to what it is that they need to provide, which of course has nothing to do with an account balance, interest rates, inputs and outputs. we're looking to move, and I think there's support from FMA, or at least some acknowledgement of the merits of moving away from quarterly, usually nil, reports on limit breaks and related party transactions through to an alternative such as, we think, event-driven reporting. Telling Gavin when you've actually got something to report, and filing a report at the next quarter end and with annual certification. So that's going well. Another big issue facing not only those schemes that have got to produce fund updates, but also those that are on market with PDSs, and there's still a meaningful number of those, is the need for, it's not universally appreciated, but the need for those materials, those offer materials, to be on a manager website. So unless your admin manager provides you with your own website, or you have your own website, that is an issue for you. The extent of the problem, it appears that roughly 45 of your schemes require fund updates, and 27 of those don't have their own or administrator hosted portal. In terms of publicly available PDSs, again, publicly available means being on one's own website, about 6 of 21 open schemes that we looked at have no website. So we need some solutions. Obviously, one possibility is uploading to the sponsors' intranet, if any, or perhaps just acknowledging that uploading to the disclosed register for this smaller end of town suffices. So this is still an ongoing effort. The FMA has sought the industry's finalised view on the most important pain points, who they affect, and how we'd like them solved. It's going well. In terms of, whoops, I've got to better go back. The work on the small stranded defined benefit schemes. So we're seeing, obviously this sector has something of a sort of a hourglass profile. There's very big DC mostly, or hybrid schemes at the top end, and a swag of really small, what we are now calling stranded defined benefit schemes. This is an issue not only for those schemes that are purely pensions based, but also for the, if you like, the legacy hybrid DB component of a scheme which is now overwhelmingly accounts-based, and we're all familiar with those. The solution that certainly I'm advocating for and we're looking to facilitate is a transfer to some form of allocated pensions solution in a master trust. It is tried and true. Exemptions are in place among certainly 3 of the providers, enabling the onboarding into their master trust of pensioners and non-employees, and these are regulated as life benefit plans under the FMCA, but the impediment, of course, is the requirement for individual member, sometimes nonagenarian pensioner consents. The aim is an FMA consented bulk transfer solution. We probably need a test case. I want to see us prevailing in the argument that with contractually preordained full funding requirements, constraints on termination, and perhaps you've gone to the pensioner group, the member group, and got majority consents for good measure, that should be enough in principle to get FMA over the line and get those individual subscribers into a more future-proof and more cost-efficient savings platform. Another one that's interesting that came up when we met in July was the possibility of just actually looking reasonably forensically at our wind-up provisions and taking the step, if we feel we can, of triggering a wind-up, and then basically having a conversation with FMA about the consequent approval of a lift and shift into a master trust. We looked, and that's my firm, we looked at a selection of 28 smaller DB schemes on Disclose in this regard, and though I've yet to analyse the findings closely, my colleague found a little surprisingly that half, 14 of them, had flexible provide an equivalent alternative type wording. A few allowed lump sum payments outright, and only just under half mandated annuity purchases, unless of course members agreed otherwise. So there's some flex there. Just to bring to your attention, one of the things vexing this sector in the last little while has been the common reporting standard imposed on us from on high by the IRD and by OECD. This is obviously exchange of information between tax jurisdictions where you do or you might have non-resident members in your scheme. In broad terms, we know what CRS is doing. It's all about collecting, reporting and exchanging tax residency information. KiwiSaver schemes collectively are all exempted under their own exemption notice. Workplace schemes dipped out. That's not good enough. Most of you comply definitionally as either a broad participation retirement fund or a narrow participation retirement fund, depending on your size. But those whole of scheme exemptions are subject to some really quite scary hair triggers. So recently, just for noting, effective end of July, we obtained an umbrella excluded accounts determination that workplace savings schemes can fall back on should they see themselves likely to fail either of those tests. And that's been a really good initiative for which we commend IRD, and it's available online. Pending changes being monitored. Really this is about, for the trustees in the room, just actually knowing at high level what all these various law changes that are barrelling towards us are doing and what they mean for your schemes. We're hearing a lot about FSLA, the new financial advisor regime. I want to assure the attendees here that the advice on a product made available through the workplace, providing information only, providing procedural advice, passing on another's advice and so forth, and more particularly financial advice given by an employer to an employee in relation to a financial product made available through the workforce, which of course we're sensibly hanging our hats on. Those exemptions are largely carried over into that new statute. KiwiSaver changes impacting complying funds. Obviously we've all heard about Mr Fairhall and his success with early withdrawal facility for persons with life-shortening congenital conditions. Great news. That will bind complying funds. We're looking at the detail. That's been a good result. Property Relationships Act legislation reform. Relevantly for this group, the Law Commission recently published a review of and recommendations for changes to that legislation. And it seems members of workplace savings schemes will still be able to give, if the Law Commission view prevails, direct payment instructions to the trustees of that scheme re the division of relationship property when a relationship falls over. But helpfully they have said that court orders should no longer be necessary in order to give such instructions. Procedurally compliant contracting out or settlement agreements should suffice, so that's good stuff. Privacy reform. The Privacy Act's being modernised, so there's a lot happening. The big change for this audience is the need for the new duty to notify the Privacy Commission if it's reasonable to believe that a privacy protection breach may have caused or is likely to cause serious harm to individuals. You can do so voluntarily now, but it's no longer going to be just a hygiene thing. And also the Privacy Commissioner will be empowered to issue a compliance notice. A big one you've heard a lot of rhetoric about is the Trusts Act 2019, replacing our old friends the Trustee Act 1956 and the Perpetuities Act effective 30 January 2021. It's good law. It's designed to make trust law simpler and more accessible. It prescribes a set of mandatory duties that can't be modified or excluded, but they're pretty motherhood stuff. Know and act in accordance with your deed, act in good faith and for a member's benefit, and exercise your powers for a proper purpose. Its investment provisions largely carry over those that are in the current statute. They protect you where in practical terms you take into account when investing the legal list of relevant considerations. And if challenged on your investments, a court may take into account diversification and adherence to an investment strategy. When reviewing whether a trustee is liable for a breach of duty, there remains a facility to exonerate a trustee which has acted honestly, reasonably and ought fairly to be excused. So that's not a paradigm shift. AML CFT, most of you are exempted from the AML statute at the moment. We're working with the Department of Justice, which intends rolling up all the various disparate sort of scheme-specific exemptions that we have now into one, but without material amendment, and we'll stay across that. The tax working group, obviously the capital gains tax proposals got shot down in flames, but recommendations still live and being considered for inclusion, in each case for KiwiSaver only, are things like ESCT refunds for lower earners, increasing the government contribution matching rate and concessionary pie tax rates. We will be advocating some equity, of course, for other schemes such as yours as appropriate. And lastly, the Conduct of Financial Institutions review by MB, responding to some really challenging FMA and RBNZ findings on managing poor conduct. Again, they're proposing probably relevantly for this sector, a principles-based set of core duties backed by proactive supervision. That review is focused on big banks and life insurers for now, but the financial institution definition's been kept deliberately broad, so it will assume some relevance. But the concepts are not scary. Examples: manage conflicts of interest fairly and transparently, and ensure your complaints are handled in a fair, timely and transparent way. So that's a bit of a whistle stop. There's a lot happening. I'll hand over to Helen to put meat on the bones.
Thank you, Mike, and hello everyone. To put a little context of me, I actually fit into both of Gavin's large and small in terms of the complexity and the size of my scheme. So yeah, some of the reforms that we hope for would certainly be helpful. And I also used to work for a fund manager, so in the last 20 odd years I've sat around board tables, but for different lengths of time and for different purposes. So some of my comments are not to be taken out of context, but they're really, when you used to sit there and now you sit here, you can see how things could be done and could be done better. So these comments are for all trustees. Some of them are specific to LITs, but you know, it goes for all trustees. And the first one, it's taken as given, you know you're trusteed. You know, when you have a super scheme, there is a trustee, that is the law. There are amendments that can be made, but the obligations, you need to know what you can and can't do under it. Also, the last slide that Mike was talking about was investment process, strategic asset allocation. What are the things that happen that is taken for a given, but actually have different outcomes for your members, and as members age? And let me just say that, not even statistically, but I can say that for many of the pensioners in my schemes are living well into their 90s. So if they're in an old restricted scheme, there's a fair chance they're going to live a whole lot longer, because they're obviously getting some more income. They can pay for some of the things that they might not be able to pay under New Zealand superannuation. So strategic asset allocation becomes important as your members age and as times change. So you need to be looking at that with your investment consultants and around the table deciding when is the time right. It's not about making changes because you think equity markets are going down. Absolutely not. That it is more about the change within your membership. And also understanding within that asset allocation or the investment process that you've chosen, some people call it a strategy, so be careful, because strategy can mean something else. Why have positions been taken or maintained? Make sure you're asking those questions. And if a portfolio manager for a fund has changed, is there an impact or isn't there? Just the same as, is a manager achieving the benchmark, the outcomes that you've set for them? What are the costs of changing an investment manager? Sometimes you can look and say, oh, that manager's better, but then you go, how much does it cost to change? Or if we change, do we get a better outcome? So with your investment manager, you must always be looking constantly to ensure that what you're providing for your members is what they expect. And I was at a session earlier talking about trust, and it really brought home to me is those members trust us around the table to be making the right decisions. Another one, a number of the larger funds have multi-managers with, if you've got global equities, you might have 7 managers. Well, what does that mean? Not a whole lot if everything's going along quite well, but what if one of those managers change and all of a sudden what was going along quite well doesn't go as well, or maybe it goes fantastically. Do you have to worry? No, but you have to be aware of it. So it's always about what is going to happen in the future. There's no point looking back in the past. It'll give you some idea, but it won't tell you about what's going to happen in the future. And then, because I used to do it, client service. You know, to me, it's that responsiveness. It's about getting the maximum benefit as a trustee from education, whether it's from your consultants, your fund managers, etc. Is it fact? Is it spin? You know, the opportunities, you get lots of opportunities to attend things. I say to all trustees, take it if you can. It's not about the lunch that you get, it's about what you learn while you're there. So, you know, I think it's really important. Also, what's important is reporting. The reports that you get in your board papers. Go back if it's you get 20 odd pages and actually only half a page relates to the fund that you've got. Go back and ask for something that's specific to you, if that makes it easier for you. I look at a number of my fellow trustees around the table, they don't have time to read 20 pages. So it's about working with the providers and getting them to be adaptable to you and helping with queries. And Gavin and Mike both alluded to this, but are your members in the right vehicle? And might a master trust be more appropriate? I see in that conversation happening with a number of the schemes going forward. There's no silver bullet immediately, but I think there are changes in store, and we have to constantly look at efficiencies, economics, and time. And I guess the next page where I talk about you're a lit, you get paid to turn up. A lot of your fellow trustees don't. They don't have time. You wear a few hats around the table, but really, you know, there's economies. Some trustees who sit around the table aren't even members, so they're giving up a whole day out of their working week, and their time is getting crunched. How can you help your fellow trustees? Well, one of my signals always is looking for that bewilderment factor. And if there's that bewilderment around the table, get the presenter to focus on simple explanations. I had one example last week where the answer came back with more jargon. And so what did I get later on? A couple of emails. Can you just explain to me what global macro is? Well, you could have gone onto Wiki, but, you know, that was the type of thing, you know, they don't have time to sit there. You don't want them looking up on their phone. What does that mean? So to me, it's really important that we make sure around the table that our fellow trustees are understanding things that are being told to them, and if they don't understand or they don't ask the questions, it's up to you to tease out the explanations where necessary. Another thing to help you all is setting up a cyclical service provider review, including yourself. You know, I think every 3 years it makes really good sense to look and say, are you still providing the right outcomes for the people around the table? Are the service providers providing it? You don't go for a full RFP, but it makes take the time to look and say, are you getting the right service? You've got to assist the Secretariat. I mean, on my various schemes, the secretaries do an amazing job. They all do it differently, but you've got to help them in terms of the agenda, the minutes, the actions. Get them to bring solutions to you, to the board. Don't get a whole big discussion while you're there. Actually come with a solution from management. Come and say, this is what we see. You can tick it off. If they need to do more work, send it back. So, you know, making good use of your time. And something that I've done with one or two of my fellow lets is organise some trustee workshops. Don't do it every year, but every 12 to 18 months, I think it's a really good time to just look and have a refresher. Are you doing things that you should be doing? What can you all be doing better, differently? And what are the efficiencies? What are the changes that have gone on? It's also a great networking opportunity. We did one recently, and you know, they work in different organisations. They don't have the time to meet other trustees, and it's a great opportunity for them to chat and to get to know each other. Because if they come to a seminar like this, it's pretty hard to find fellow trustees in 600 people, let me just say.
I've got a prompt here, questions to come from the floor with roaming microphone. Does that mean there's one pending? Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, questions are welcome.
Okay, because up here, unless you've got holding this, you can't actually see too much out there. Okay, so just to wrap up, what are some of the disciplines? and they're not limited to this, but you know, for me, networking. And networking is amongst yourselves. There's not many lits, but take the opportunity to catch up with people. Fund managers, the same thing. You know, a cup of coffee takes 30 minutes, 45 minutes. It's really good to go and talk to some of your managers, talk to some managers that you don't use on your schemes, but I actually find a cup of coffee every now and again is time well spent. Likewise, fellow restricted scheme trustees, I have an advantage because I know lots of them, but it's also, I'll introduce other lits to them. And industry contacts, including the FMA, as Gavin said, his door is open. Make the time, if you're in Wellington, to go and see him. You know, I'll catch up with him when I go down. Sometimes we have a coffee. Sometimes I say, I need a conversation in your office. I'll bring the coffee. So, you know, he's very willing and able. If you have a complex question you're not sure of, I'll send an email and say, can I please talk to you? And I've always got an answer, and for that, thank you, Gavin. I'm very grateful. And be prepared to provide feedback. My chairs, one of them said to me, well, since you've been involved, we find out all sorts of stuff. So they're happy for you to share. You don't share state secrets, but you take the time to share information that you might find out around other tables or people are doing things differently. Something which happened this year was succession planning, and it's not about age, it's about health. So always think about around the table if there are changes with employer schemes. Sometimes they change. Company employees aren't so invested if they're not in the scheme. Can they really be bothered? But you know, also health circumstances will mean that some people are not available. So you always have to have a backup. And the last thing is just registers. A gift register, there's no set target. Some schemes will have numbers. I talked to Tim about this earlier and said, what's your number? But it's as much as anything, keep a record of what you do. In my personal development, if I've gone to a lunch and I've listened to a presentation, if it was a finger lunch, I wouldn't say it was a lunch. But if I went to a lunch at a restaurant, I would always write down, I went to a restaurant. Don't have to put the value, but you went to a restaurant. It costs a whole lot more, I know, because I used to pay for those types of things. Your interests, the risks and complaints, equally those are important. Each board meeting, make sure you have those in there. And it's not rocket science. Simplicity, order, and discipline. And most of all, it's trust. They need to trust you that this is the members, that you're looking after them. The company wants to trust you to make sure you're doing the right thing for them. And overall, do a good job. Bernard.
Thanks. I've only got one slide, so it's probably not really worth standing up and doing it. But so on actuarial issues, I think I mentioned last year that in terms of deficit clearance for DB schemes, FMA generally expects it to be done within 5 years. There are occasional variations, but that sort of has become the accepted norm. It's now also general practice, sorry this is a bit technical, but probably 5 years ago when we did a funding valuation, we didn't necessarily allow for future mortality improvements, but we did for IS-19 calculations. Now it's pretty much standard that we do for both, and that's quite a big unknown in terms of defined benefit liabilities as we continue to have improvements in medicine, you know, life expectancy is just going to keep increasing. So we have a sort of set of standard assumptions which at the moment seem reasonable, but they need to be reviewed from time to time. There's a new standard for defined benefit schemes. It's pretty much like the old standard. We tried to be a bit less prescriptive. The group that developed it started off in the first meeting, I remember, we decided we're going to try and make it 2 pages long. It's about 17, but we did as well as we could, but anyway. In terms of asset allocation, probably the biggest thing that's happened in the last year is the list of allowed investments, which will give you the exemption that Mike was talking about before. Generally, it's broad enough to capture most of the assets that super schemes invest in. There are a number of asset classes, mainly I'm thinking overseas asset classes, which you can't, in theory, currently access through a local pie. And what I think will happen is that the fund managers will start filling that gap as the demand for those asset classes sort of starts coming from both from the clients and from the consultants. Overall, I think it's a good move, the reduction in compliant costs, and I think it's a sort of something that the industry can bear in terms of the slight restriction on investments at the moment. Probably only affects 5% of schemes in theory, so it's not a big issue. Generally, and Helen was talking about this before, I think that we now have a concentration of experienced independent trustees, and they sit on a number of boards each. So what I'm seeing is that clients are tending to standardise the way that they run their meetings. There's a lot more consistency in how meetings are run, which is great. I think there's been a raising of the standard, and sort of some of the stragglers in terms of best practice have been forced to sort of up their game. So all in all, it's pretty positive, I think. But
we're going to give you the last word, Gavin, but I thought just before that we would just whiz back to, obviously you've heard a lot today, restricted scheme trustees and those involved in this sector about good conduct. And I'm always mindful that you don't really have customers, you don't really sell product, you're not distributors, you have members, right? So what is the relevance of good conduct for this sector? And I don't think you can ever bust out FMA's good conduct profile wagon wheel too often. The 5 C's of good conduct, look, I won't rattle through all of them, but they include, among others, capability and culture. And this is as relevant for you guys as it is for the big end of town. Capability doesn't mean knowing everything. Delegation to specialists is both welcomed and encouraged. It really just means knowing your core FMCA compliance obligations and having a delegations framework enabling you to actively monitor others' adherence to their service standards, as Helen mentioned earlier, and to their agreed obligations. Being able to demonstrate also that you as board members have complementary skill sets and that each of you is engaging appropriately. Culture, what does that mean for this complement? I put it thus, mistakes happen, acknowledge them, own them, address them, and learn from them. So just following on from Helen's observations, just some additional legal observations. Obviously we're hearing time and again, it's conduct that matters and more than just simple box ticking. But what are we seeing in terms of the things where, the areas where LITs, as both Helen and Bernard referred to, are helping restricted scheme boards lift their game? They include things like, consider now, because we see them working to really good effect, the use of formal committees to enhance scheme governance and facilitate a focus on key issues at trustee directors meetings. Possibilities there are investments committee, communications committee, compliance committee, contracts and appointments. Any such committees could include not only trustee board members but also relevant advisors and have potentially wider representation. The point being that after discussion of an issue at committee level, a committee could then recommend to a board meeting whatever was to be agreed and resolved. And it's just a more streamlined way to progress issues that could otherwise take time at board meetings. Helen mentioned board evaluations to support the ongoing enhancement of scheme governance and the development of you guys as directors. A delegations framework is key. It's a key part of our role as legal advisors is ensuring that those services agreements are adequately detailed in terms of you having discharged your duties to take all reasonable steps to ensure that your delegates are subject to the same duties and restrictions as have been imposed on you as a board. Adequate suite of policies, obviously they speak for themselves. One thing just to pick out, overwhelmingly trustee boards in this sector are members of Financial Services Complaints Limited or Fiscal. One of Fiscal's terms of reference and in practical terms a contractual obligation imposed on its members is that participants have a documented internal complaints handling process appropriate to the nature of their services and the scale of their operations, including who is responsible for complaints handling, so be mindful of that. Cyber resilience, another new one, but a July 2019 FMA report on cyber resilience in financial services noted that the level of high or very high perceived risk in New Zealand is much lower than globally, about 35 versus 56%. But there's absolutely no objective reason to believe that New Zealand operators face a materially lower risk of cyber attack than those in other countries, noting a 205% increase in such incidents in 2017. So that's something to ask of your outsourced admin provider. What are you doing cyber resilience? One that's come up time and again in recent weeks actually in our practice is, are your insurances adequate and fit for purpose? That involves examining not just have you got the right suite of policies in place, but what do they say? What are the exceptions, the limitations, the conditions? Is the aggregate sum insured, particularly around your D&O insurance, adequate? Especially where those liability caps and the defence costs cover are shared among a directorate of maybe 5 to 8 people. And lastly, is your governance model still fit for purpose? We all leaned into the FMCA regime when we transitioned in 2016. The most popular model to have adopted was moving to a single special purpose corporate trustee model. Some are using external custodians. Some had a long history of using a natural person trustee board and having a nominee hold the assets. Is that still the right model, or does it complicate things, at least in terms of process and paperwork? And there are some golden rules here, and they're very closely analogous to those that apply to company directors, because they have fiduciary obligations also. Have you received advice and information on which you can reasonably rely? Have you monitored your delegates? Have you considered each matter with an active, inquiring mind? And you can be wrong, provided you've made all reasonable efforts to avoid error. Now, good governance has often been described as noses in, but fingers out. But as trustee directors / trustees, you must still take a diligent and intelligent interest in the available information at meetings and between meetings. Understand it and apply an inquiring mind. What we mean here is you can rely on advice, but not unquestioningly, only when and to the extent that it's reasonable to do so. It's not enough to point simply to a sign-off, for example. Ask yourself, is it adequate? And whether it contains assumptions or limitations which should put you on notice of matters which you as trustees must address yourselves. And as I said earlier, we're going to give Gavin the last word, the FMA perspective.
Hello?
Oh, use mine.
Thanks, Mike. So, Mike very generously found some words from the FMA Conduct Guide, which he has dropped into the slide. And you know, my last word is I enjoy the interactions with both trustees and their advisors. My door is always open. I'm much happier if I've had a heads up that something has happened, we are fixing it, and we will write to you shortly about it, rather than finding out about it by the wrong method. So yeah, and where I can add value with some suggestions of how others may or may not have dealt with an issue, especially if it's something out of the ordinary. Having been in the game for over 30 plus years and having just ticked over 25 years being the regulator of pension schemes together with the government actuary, I think I've seen most things that can happen one way or another, and we've probably dealt with them in, I think, much more pragmatic ways at times than can be the case if too many people get their fingers in the pie.
Yeah, well, I just, from an advisor's point of view, I think we're pretty lucky to have this environment where we can talk to Gavin on a no-names basis, sort of no surprises, and he's pretty flexible in terms of finding solutions to issues. So I think we are pretty lucky in that respect, certainly compared to some jurisdictions. Partly because it's a small country, but partly just because possibly the people in the industry know each other, and there's sort of some element of trust I think has been built up as well.
Have we got any questions from the floor? For example, did Gavin's stats elicit any surprise? Is there anything that... Oh, David, hi.
Thank you, Gavin. The only thing that in your stats you showed that the membership of the restricted schemes is actually growing. I mean, is that all KiwiSaver growth, or is there other growth in that?
So restricted schemes grew slightly.
Well, you said last year there was 162,000, and this year there's about 167. So members.
No, that's so it's 2017 and 2019. So reverse the.
Oh, I got it wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's going backwards.
So it's going backwards.
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's going backwards.
All right. Good.
Just while the mic's coming, it seems that Australianisation of our sector is a wee way off. In Australia, there's 2.8 trillion under management in compulsory super. There are 20 corporate funds worth collectively 58 billion, so we're a long way from that.
Thanks guys. David Beagle, I'm the immediate past chair of Workplace Savings. Really great to see the presentation today and the audience here who are interested in this part of the business. Now that Workplace Savings is fully merged into the Financial Service Council, that was approved by Workplace Savings in May of this year. It became formal in July of this year. As your immediate past chair and a board member of FSC, one of the provisions of the merger agreement is a separate working group for workplace savings. This particular cohort, the trustees, the LITs, the restricted schemes, there's provision in the agreement, and there is capacity to have a really strong working group of the likes of yourselves. Been pretty much offline since May. I'm not aware that subgroup or that working group has met. I know there was a session with the FMA in July, I think, which has been alluded to. But picking up on some of the points, Helen's point about networking, doing stuff together, sharing each other's expertise, that working group is there for that to happen. It hasn't met, and the reason being it isn't resourced with good, capable people like yourselves to make it happen. So I think the way forward, if you're keen to carry on under the FSC banner, which there's the capacity of the head office resource to help in this area, but they need good expertise in the working group to make it happen. So I think going forward, watch this space for a plea to establish that working group, and we will be seeking representation from yourselves. That's the forum, amongst others, to keep working in this space. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Those are really fitting final comments. There is a lot to do, and there's a lot of upside potential in terms of debates that we're having, correspondence we're engaged in with DOJ, FMA, MB, and various others, and there's just a lot there. We've paced ourselves perfectly. There's a minute left.
I just wanted to finish up by saying thank you so much to our panel today. There was some really interesting advice there, and I know I'm going to take a lot away with the restricted scheme that we look after, particularly the update from Mike on those pending changes. Thank you very much. I'm also going to take away some life notes, and I think we all are. Things like ask yourself, is it fact or spin? Watch out for the warning signs of bewilderment. I think that can actually apply to a lot of things in our lives. It's not about age, it's about health. And mistakes happen, learn from them, and I think the final thing, mistakes happen, and if in doubt, talk about it. So I think we can all sort of take those away to our home lives as well. So thank you very much, panel, much appreciated.